Something strange happened in the wilderness, so strange that 3 hikers, in completely different parts of the world, reported the same chilling detail. A detail that still can't be explained. And here's the shocking part. Each of them thought they were alone until they heard footsteps that didn't match anything human or animal. People always assume the wilderness is peaceful. But every year, over 1,600 hikers report encounters they can't logically explain, from impossible shadows to voices in empty valleys. And today, you're about to hear 3 of the most unnerving stories ever caught in first-hand report stories that people still argue about. And this is where things get interesting. Each hiker walked away convinced they survived something they weren't supposed to see. Strange patterns, vanishing figures, trails that shifted as if the forest itself was moving. Yeah, it gets weird fast. Stay with me, because the final story has a twist that even seasoned rangers said shouldn't be possible, and that's not an exaggeration. Let's begin. This one begins with a guy named Aaron, a confident, experienced hiker who spent half his weekends wandering Colorado's backcountry like it was his second home. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't a paranormal believer type. He wasn't even the friend who tells dramatic stories at campfires. He was the logical one. Let's check the weather first. Don't leave food out. We're not getting lost today. Kind of hiker. Which is exactly why what happened to him shakes people. Because if he questioned his own senses, anyone would. So Aaron set out on a solo trek in late September, aiming to catch the fall colors on an isolated trail he'd walked twice before. No surprises, just quiet forest, aspen leaves like golden coins, and the usual sound of squirrels screaming at each other for no reason. But this trip took a turn the moment he reached a narrow stretch of trail that locals casually call the Counting Path. Most hikers don't even know the nickname. The ones who do usually laugh it off. The rangers? They tend to change the subject. Here's where things start to get unsettling. As the sun began sinking behind the ridge, the temperature dropped faster than he expected. Aaron wasn't panicking, but the forest felt heavier. Sound carried oddly. His footsteps echoed too sharply for a dirt path, almost as if the ground was hardening. Then right when he stopped to adjust his backpack, he heard it. A single, crisp step behind him, then another, each perfectly spaced. Same weight, same rhythm. A metronome in the trees. He turned around so fast, the strap on his pack nearly snapped, but nothing was there. Just a long stretch of empty trail, the kind of emptiness that makes your brain whisper, okay, maybe it was a deer? Except deer don't walk like accountants, stalking through the woods counting paces. He forced himself forward. A few cautious steps, and then step, 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 again behind him. Or maybe to the side. The direction didn't even feel consistent. It shifted like the sound was choosing places to stand. This was shocking, because sound in forests usually scatters randomly. It shouldn't feel intentional. But Aaron said the footsteps seemed to correct themselves whenever he paused, like something was matching him with uncanny precision. The trail started feeling too narrow. His heartbeat got louder, which is a terrible soundtrack when you're trying not to freak out. At the 20-minute mark, it escalated. He'd speed up. The steps sped up. He'd slow down. They slowed down. Maybe it's a person messing with me, he thought. But here's the flaw. Humans trip on twigs, kick gravel, breathe loudly, or shuffle. People aren't perfect walking machines. And animals? They're even more chaotic. Whatever followed him had flawless timing, no weight shift, no drag, no uneven crunch of leaves. Just the clean, crisp beat of footsteps that sounded like they were being copied and pasted. He yelled out something along the lines of, "If someone's there, knock it off." Nothing. Silence. Then the footsteps resumed as soon as he did. Aaron's brain went into that weird survival mode where you're terrified but also annoyed. He kept muttering things like, Okay, great. I'm being followed by a Fitbit ghost. But humor only helps until the situation gets too real. He hit the point of full anxiety when he noticed the temperature drop again. Not by a few degrees more, like walking into a refrigerator. His breath fogged. Colorado evenings get chilly, but this was unnaturally fast. And here's where the mystery deepens. He finally reached the fork in the trail where he'd usually turn toward a meadow. But this time, there was something off, something wrong. The signpost was missing. He'd passed that sign before twice. It had always been there. Hikers rely on that sign. Rangers maintain it. But now, nothing. Just two barely visible paths splitting like the forest. Couldn't he decide what shape it wanted to be? Aaron picked the right fork, assuming muscle memory couldn't lie. He walked 10 steps, and the footsteps behind him stopped. Everything went horribly silent. Birds? Gone. Wind? Gone. His own breathing? Loud enough to annoy him. Then he heard something whisper through the branches overhead. Not speech, not wind. A soft, rhythmic tit-tit, like stones gently tapping against each other. In time. As if something was counting slower now. That's when Aaron snapped. He turned around, grabbed the pocket knife he definitely couldn't fight anything with, and started speed walking, like his legs were auditioning for a cartoon. After several agonizing minutes, he saw 2 rangers in bright jackets ahead of him. Humans. Glorious, normal humans. Aaron rushed toward them like they were long-lost relatives. One ranger looked at him and immediately went serious. You okay? You look like you saw a ghost. Aaron laughed, partly because of the irony and partly because he was seconds from crying. He explained everything. The footsteps, the rhythm, the missing sign. He expected them to say something comforting like, yeah, probably an animal, or you're just tired. But instead, one ranger exchanged a look with the other and asked, where did this happen? Aaron pointed back down the trail. The ranger sighed and said words that still bother him to this day. People mention that trail all the time. Except it isn't part of the map anymore. Aaron froze. What do you mean anymore? The ranger just shrugged. It was rerouted years ago. That section's not maintained. It shouldn't be accessible unless something shifted. Shifted, like the forest quietly rearranged itself. Aaron asked the obvious question. What about the footsteps? The ranger didn't smile, didn't laugh, didn't say anything comforting. He simply said, you're not the first. That's it. No explanation. No follow-up. Just a quiet admission that something in that part of the wilderness shouldn't exist, but keeps existing anyway. Aaron didn't sleep well for weeks afterward. He also never went hiking alone again. And whenever friends asked why, he'd joke, because the forest counted me, and I don't want to know what number comes next. But behind the humor, he still can't answer the question. What walks behind a person with perfect rhythm, leaves no prints, removes trail signs, and keeps appearing on trails that supposedly don't exist anymore? This one involves 2 friends, Mason and Tyler, who prided themselves on being the prepared campers, the guys who show up with gear that costs more than their rent and argue about which water filter removes 0.0001% more bacteria. They camped in the Pacific Northwest often enough to feel practically sponsored by the trees. So when they decided to spend a quiet weekend in one of the region's lesser-known forest zones, they weren't expecting anything dramatic. Worst-case scenario? Rain? Best-case scenario? Clear skies and a campfire where they'd talk trash about each other's survival skills. They arrived around noon, found a perfect spot-flat ground, good tree shade, no giant creepy roots, and set up camp like the efficient little outdoor nerds they were. Tent up in minutes, packs organized, food stored properly. You know, the kind of campsite a wildlife textbook would take pictures of. Nothing felt off at first. In fact, the forest was peaceful. So peaceful one of them joked, Feels like the trees should thank us for being here. In hindsight, that line aged terribly. Night fell without issues. They cooked dinner, traded jokes, and listened to the usual forest soundtrack: crickets, occasional owl hoots, one extremely confused squirrel yelling at nothing. But around 2 a.m., Mason woke up. Not because he heard something loud, but because he heard something small. A soft click, 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 like tiny stones tapping gently together. Almost polite. Not threatening, but weird enough for him to open one eye. He assumed it was Tyler snoring weirdly. Or maybe critters poking around. He rolled over and went back to sleep. But the noise kept returning in short bursts throughout the night. Click, click, click. Never too close. Never too far. Just present. By morning, he'd forgotten about it. Until he opened the tent and saw their camp wasn't the way they left it. At first, he thought maybe Tyler had gotten up early and reorganized things. But the more he looked, the stranger it became. Their backpacks, heavy, full, bulky, had been moved. Not dragged. Not kicked. Placed. One bag sat upright against a tree trunk, like it was posing for a camping catalog. The other leaned neatly on a boulder at a perfect angle, as if someone had adjusted it several times to get the symmetry right. Mason called out, "Dude, what did you do to the bags?" Tyler stuck his sleepy head out of the tent. "What bags?" Then he saw them and froze. Because here's the creepy part. Neither of them walked over there. The ground between the tent and the moved packs was pristine. No footprints, no paw prints, no drag marks, no disturbed soil. Just untouched earth. That detail alone is disturbing, because the forest floor in that area is basically a gossip queen. Everything leaves evidence. Even a raccoon shuffling through leaves looks like a crime scene afterward. But the weirdness wasn't finished. Upon closer inspection, they noticed something else. The metal tent pegs they'd hammered deep into the ground, pulled out. Not tossed around, not bent, not scattered, but arranged. In a perfectly straight line beside the fire ring. Evenly spaced, shiny sides facing the same direction. At this point, Mason said the most relatable sentence ever uttered by a man who wants to pretend he's not terrified. "Okay, funny prank. You can reveal yourself now. Forest gnomes." Tyler wasn't amused. He kept muttering, "This is wrong. This is wrong," which is a great phrase if your goal is to panic both people equally. Now, let's pause here. Could an animal do this? Not likely. Wildlife doesn't arrange objects with aesthetic intention. Bears would have torn the bags open. Raccoons would have stolen half their snacks. Coyotes don't do arts and crafts projects. And absolutely nothing in the forest pulls tent pegs with the care of a grandmother folding laundry. The friends searched around the campsite for clues. No broken branches, no paw prints, no human tracks. Just stillness. And that's what bothered them the most. The forest felt too still, too calm, like someone had pressed the mute button on nature. Tyler said he kept feeling watched, not by one pair of eyes, but by dozens. Like the trees themselves were keeping score. Then Mason remembered something. The tapping sounds. He mentioned it casually, but the moment the words left his mouth, Tyler's face dropped. He'd heard it too. Same rhythm. Same intervals. And that's when they realized neither of them had imagined it. Now, here's where things shift from weird to historically weird. That region has old stories, really old, passed down through tribes who lived there long before people with backpacks and granola bars showed up. They tell of forest beings sometimes called the Watchers. Not spirits, not monsters. More like observers. Silent ones. Ones who move without disturbing the ground. Ones who rearrange belongings not to steal them, but to signal something. Some stories say the Watchers organize objects to protect travelers. Others say they do it to warn them. And a few say They do it simply because they can, no reason at all. Just the forest reminding humans they aren't the only ones with hands. Mason and Tyler didn't know any of that at the time. They just felt extremely uncomfortable with how cleanly their things had been touched. But the strangest moment came when they approached the tree where one backpack had been propped. Carved into the bark, so faint you'd miss it, unless the light was perfect, was a small, fresh notch. Not initials, not a symbol. Just a tiny angled cut. Straight, precise, deliberate. It looked like someone testing the blade of a very sharp knife. That was it. The moment both of them collectively agreed, without speaking. Nope. They packed everything with record speed. They didn't stop to eat breakfast. They didn't even bother checking their route twice. On the way out, Tyler tried to lighten the mood by saying, "If some invisible forest creature wants to do my laundry next time, I'll leave it out." But the joke landed like a rock. Neither laughed. Even days later, back home, the confusion stuck with them. They kept replaying the details. The tapping, the rearranged gear, the untouched ground, the weird notch in the tree. Eventually, Mason talked to a ranger, not expecting answers, just needing something. The ranger listened quietly, then asked, "You said the pegs were lined up? Perfectly?" Mason nodded. The ranger sighed. A heavy one. The kind someone makes when they've heard something before, but wish they hadn't. He simply said, "We get a few reports like that each year. If you ever camp there again, keep your gear inside the tent." No explanation. No reassurance. Just advice. And that advice says everything. Because whatever moved their belongings wasn't an animal, wasn't a human, and wasn't leaving footprints. Mason summed it up perfectly later. It's one thing to feel watched in the woods. It's another thing when the watcher touches your stuff and leaves no trace of being there. This last one comes from a solo hiker named Lucas, a quiet, level-headed guy who hiked as a form of therapy. He wasn't chasing adrenaline. He wasn't trying to find himself. He just liked the quiet, the routine, the sound of boots against dirt. The kind of person the wilderness usually welcomes. But his most memorable hike wasn't peaceful. It wasn't calming. And it definitely wasn't the kind of story he could ever shrug off. The problem? It starts with something simple, a figure on a ridge, and ends with something that still doesn't match anything in biology, physics, or common sense. Let's break it down. Lucas was hiking in a remote region of British Columbia, a place so scenic it could make even mediocre photographers look talented. Rugged mountains, misty slopes, endless pines, the type of wilderness where you half expect a documentary narrator to start talking about the circle of life. He'd planned a 3-day trip. Nothing extreme, but remote enough that his phone had given up on having a signal about an hour into the hike. He set up camp the first night without any problems, ate his food, read a paperback mystery novel, and fell asleep listening to a nearby creek. The kind of peaceful night every hiker dreams about. The next morning, around 7 a.m., he started up a ridge trail. That's when he noticed something at the top. A figure, not close enough to see details. Not far enough to dismiss as a tree stump or weird rock. Just a dark silhouette against a smoky blue sky. He assumed it was another hiker. Maybe someone who started early. Maybe a hunter. Maybe someone who also wanted to enjoy the morning quiet. Completely normal, until it moved. If you can call that moving. According to Lucas, the figure didn't walk. It didn't step. It didn't sway like a human shifting weight. It jolted, like someone holding a puppet and yanking the control strings too quickly. One abrupt motion. Freeze. Another abrupt motion. Freeze. Imagine someone skipping frames in real life. At first, Lucas laughed. Out loud. Because his brain went straight into, "Oh, that's just a trick of the light." Calm down, drama queen. He even blinked hard a couple of times to reset his vision. But that didn't fix anything. If anything, blinking made it worse. Every time his eyes opened, the figure was in a new position. Not drastically different, not teleporting across the ridge, but shifted. Wrong, misplaced, tilted at an angle a human body doesn't casually achieve unless they re-auditioning for a horror movie. Lucas tried to rationalize. His brain went into full logical mode. Heat mirage? Shadow of a moving tree? Another hiker messing around? But none of those options matched the movement he saw. This was shocking, because no person moves like a broken stop-motion animation. And no shadow behaves like a S trying to win a game of red light, green light with the laws of physics. Then something hit him. The figure wasn't walking toward him or away from him. It was sliding sideways. Not turning. Sliding. As if someone had dragged it 6 inches to the left while it stood perfectly upright. Lucas felt that cold knot in his stomach, the one you get when your instincts and your logical brain both panic at the same time. Still, he kept walking, slowly, because curiosity is rude and refuses to let humans mind their own business. As he got closer, maybe 200 yards away, he stopped dead in his tracks. The figure bent, not like bending to tie a shoe, not like leaning over. No, it bent sideways, at a clean angle, like a hinge had been installed in the middle of its torso. A smooth, impossible, fluid tilt. And then it snapped upright again with a speed that made Lucas's breath catch. His first thought was, okay, so either I need to sleep more, or the forest downloaded a glitch. The second thought was, I should turn around, immediately, yesterday, if possible. But humans are stubborn, so he stayed frozen there trying to make sense of what he was seeing. That's when the figure shifted positions again, but this time it wasn't subtle. One blink, the figure was gone from the ridge. Lucas didn't even have time to panic before his eyes darted left, and there it was. Closer, still far, but closer. At this point, Lucas felt the kind of fear that doesn't scream. It whispers. It slows the world down, makes your hearing sharpen, makes every instinct line up behind one single thought. Something is wrong. He didn't take his eyes off the ridge. Not once. But the figure was no longer behaving like a distant anomaly. It was standing still, facing his direction. Not walking, not moving, just silently acknowledging him. Lucas later said, "It felt like it knew I was watching, and it didn't appreciate being observed." He backed up, carefully, slowly, like he was trying not to startle it, whatever it was. Once he got to a safer slope, he turned and practically jogged down the trail. Not full speed running, because that's how you trip, fall, and get your face adopted by a rock family. But fast enough to reveal he was absolutely, undeniably done with the paranormal Olympics happening on the ridge. When he finally got cell service hours later, he called a ranger station, not to report a monster, not to claim he saw something supernatural. He honestly just wanted someone to tell him it was a known optical illusion, or a hiker in weird gear, or maybe a new species of guy who walks like a VHS glitch. But the ranger didn't laugh, didn't reassure him, didn't say, "You're imagining things." Instead, the ranger asked him a single question. Was it on the eastern ridge? Lucas said yes. The ranger exhaled sharply, not annoyed, concerned. Then he said something that turned the whole experience from creepy to nightmare fuel. "We get reports like that every few months. Always the same area. And we've never found footprints to match." Lucas felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean, no footprints?" The ranger replied, "That ridge is covered in loose granite dust. Anything that steps there leaves a mark. Birds leave marks. Rabbits leave marks. Even blowing debris leaves patterns. But whatever people see, pause. It never leaves anything." Lucas didn't ask any more questions. He didn't want answers at that point. He just ended the call, sat on a log, and stared at the ground until his hands stopped shaking. He hasn't returned to that area since. Not because he is scared of the figure, though that's a reasonable reason, but because seeing something defy the rules of movement changes how you see the world. His final comment sums it up perfectly. I can handle predators. I can handle storms. But I can't handle something that moves like it doesn't belong to this planet.